Ever since I was a kid, I was always seeking something extraordinary. I knew that there was more to life than just the 3D reality. On psychedelics, you see the source code. You see so much deeper into reality. It shows you what is your highest potential. Like, here is the purest love. Here's the most enlightened state. And then we come back down to earth. Now we have like a North Star that we can follow and try and find our way back to that place of love. If you're connected to the guidance from within and to God and to your own heart, can you really pick up a weapon and go shoot someone in another country? Right? It's only through our disconnection with ourselves that we are allowing ourselves to be manipulated into doing other things that are violent. But when you love yourself, when you are in touch with your divinity, and you're also in touch with the unity of the planet, you know you cannot hurt anyone because you're just hurting yourself. If everyone's connected to love and to their heart, then you can't rule them.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with James Xander. James is a podcast host, psychedelic explorer, and consciousness seeker. He's also the host of the James Xander Trip, where he has deep discussions with guests around psychedelics, spirit consciousness, love, and the nature of reality. So this episode came about quite synchronistically. I had been wanting to do an episode on psychedelics for a little while, and it just so happened that last year I met James just by chance in a cafe in Mexico. And at that time, I didn't really know that he was into all this psychedelic stuff until I saw on Instagram that he was putting out these videos of his new podcast going into all these ideas. I quickly became a big fan of the podcast myself. And so James seemed like the perfect person for me to invite on this podcast to have my first full-length discussion about psychedelics. I know that this conversation is definitely far more on the kind of esoteric side of things compared to the conversations that I normally have. But I do think that these ideas are important to explore. And I also think that they tie in very neatly into the idea of freedom, and in particular with regards to spiritual freedom and healing trauma and really freeing your mind from conventional ways of thinking, which I think is going to be a really crucial part of actually moving into this next stage of the freedom movement. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a like and a share on social media. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, remember to give it a 5-star rating in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, then welcome. Be sure to hit subscribe for future episodes. And I invite all my listeners to join the Telegram group where I post all the episodes and invite people to have conversation there as well. The link for that is in the show notes. And also in the show notes is all the links for giving donation to the podcast. There's a few ways to support the show there, including monthly donations, one-off donations, and Bitcoin donations. So please do check out those links and consider donating to the show. As always, donations are hugely appreciated and will help me to keep bringing these episodes to you. All right, on to the episode. So yeah, man, thanks for joining. Like I said to you before we started this recording, super excited to get into all this stuff. Been loving the podcast you've been doing. We'll get into all that kind of stuff, but just first of all, do you want to give my listeners just a bit of an intro as to yourself? I guess probably before the psychedelic stage, and then we'll go into all of the psychedelic stuff and everything you've been up to there.
Yeah, before the psychedelic stage, I was an entrepreneur. I was also a filmmaker. I loved photography, creating music videos. After I discovered psychedelics, that's where my fascination became about the nature of reality and consciousness. And I connected deeper to my spirit. So these days, I run a podcast around spirituality and psychedelics called the James Xander Trip. I have a YouTube channel where I teach people about psychedelics, like educational material, like how they can do it intentionally, how they can do it safely. And then there's the 1 billion humans mission, which is let's get 1 billion people on the planet to all take shrooms on the same day and see what happens to the planet's frequency.
Okay, cool. Yeah, nice and succinct intro there. I guess like just for my listening audience as well, because obviously like, you coming on this podcast is kind of goes back a little while because we actually met here in Mexico just by chance. So obviously, I've been kind of super into your podcast and stuff since then. But initially, we just met in a cafe. I can't remember the name of the cafe, but it was in Playa del Carmen, right? And, you'd come out of Canada and we're kind of, fleeing some of the tyranny going on there. I'd done the same from the UK, and then we met at this cafe and just got chatting, and it turned out that we were both into kind of like editing and film and all this kind of stuff. I guess like, you mentioned there about your, I guess your more like entrepreneurial journey and stuff, kind of before doing what you're doing now. How does that go? Because I don't know too much about that. I don't think we've discussed that between us.
Yeah, so my entrepreneurial journey has been really interesting. I had a lot of highs, a lot of lows. I used to publish books on Amazon, so that was my main business, and then did really well with that. And then Amazon shut down my account, and I ended up losing the business overnight. And then because of my scarcity mindset, I then also ended up losing my entire net worth that I had built from that business. And that sent me into a depression. And that's where I discovered mushrooms, and they kind of took me out of that depression slowly. So my entrepreneurial journey has had a lot of roller coaster ups and downs. But I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit, and I feel like anyone who is someone who loves freedom, someone who loves the freedom lifestyle, someone who wants to be a master of their own destiny, they do end up on the entrepreneurial path. I'm sure you've also felt the same.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't know that actually, that your entrepreneurial path. Well, I didn't know much about it anyway, but yeah, I guess that ties straight into the psychedelic stuff. So let's start diving into it, because I said to you before. I mean, I know that we have like 2 hours here max, but there's so much to discuss. And in terms of this topic of psychedelics, like I've mentioned it a few times on the pod, like occasionally there's just been these little conversations that have happened about it, but I haven't had any just like full conversations about psychedelics and how it like kind of marries in with ideas of like self-sovereignty as well, and freedom, and purpose, and all of these other kind of concepts that we talk about. So let's start there then. Your intro to psychedelics was kind of off the back of coming out of a depression, or you were in a depression. So yeah, do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, so I think I've always been interested in reality. And ever since I was a kid, I was always seeking something extraordinary. I knew that there was more to life than just the 3D reality, like the solid, tangible stuff you see. And so I would read spiritual books, and I would explore different avenues of spirituality, but I never had that firsthand experience, that proof that I was seeking, of like, show me a UFO, give me a out of body experience, like show me some sort of proof that reality is not just 3D. And I think psychedelics was the first time where it really opened up for me. And so my very first experience was with acid, and it was an amazing, beautiful experience, because it showed me that my consciousness could be shifted, that I was still James, I was still me, but the perspective that I was looking at the world from was entirely different. It was from a higher level. And then, of course, you get the visuals, you see frequency, you see energy. And that to me was incredibly cool, because finally I was seeing energy, everything that everyone talks about in the books and all the gurus and all the teachers. And I was finally seeing actual frequency, actual energy. I was seeing the source code behind reality. And so it just became a fascination of going down the rabbit hole. And the other thing about psychedelics is I always feel like they show you more of the truth of reality. So in your sober state, we kind of get not manipulated, but we become asleep to the reality of life. We just go with the motions. We accept things as they're presented to us. But on psychedelics, you see the source code. You see so much deeper into reality. And I feel like there are truth tellers.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you're already going deep into the psychedelic stuff, and I want to go there, but I just want to like first of all preface this with your how the specifically the depression thing, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of going through that depression and then finding the psychedelics, like, because obviously before that, right? You didn't really have much of a I guess much of an understanding of it. This was new, just like it is for everyone, right? I mean, and kind of disclaimer here, I'm not like a huge psychonaut, but I've experimented with psychedelics as well. And everything you just said like rings absolutely true. And anyone who's done psychedelics is probably kind of listening to this being like, man, you're articulating this like beautifully. It's exactly what it's like. But before having that experience, you obviously, you were going through this depression. You hadn't had any, I guess, exposure to that. So first of all, what was it that brought you to psychedelics? And then how did psychedelics kind of help you through that, specifically through that kind of ordeal in your life?
What brought me to psychedelics was, I think, pure synchronicity. Like I was in the right circle of friends who were into that and they introduced me to that. And I remember I was super nervous, like I remember the very first time, even before the acid, my friend gave me a THC edible, very small dose, nothing crazy. But I was like, what is this going to do to me? Like I was nervous as fuck. How did it help with my depression? I think the way that it helped me was it showed me there was more to life than when you're depressed, you're very myopic. So you only think about your regrets and your past and how you could have done things better and why me, why this. You kind of go into a victim mindset.
Right.
And when I started doing shrooms, what it would do is it would give me the zoomed out version of my life. And it would show me that this is just one point in my life. And there's not this, you're not stuck in the maze. It actually shows you the whole maze. And that gives you hope. It also starts rewiring your brain. You start thinking, okay, there's more to life than this one moment where I feel like I failed.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like, just kind of piggybacking on what you're saying there. Like for me, I think that experience, it's almost kind of like a zooming out. It's like zooming out and recognizing your own insignificance in some way. But it's kind of your insignificance, but also your ultimate significance. There's kind of these two parallels happening at the same time. It's like you zoom out and realize, oh, well, all of my worries are completely insignificant. But actually the essence that is you is massively significant, like kind of overwhelmingly significant in some sense.
Yeah, I think it puts things in perspective. So the psychedelics don't care about how much money you lost or which business you lost. They care about how connected are you to your authentic self. How in alignment with your truth are you? And I call them truth tellers because they're going to shine a flashlight in your psyche on what you most need to work on. And it's usually not money. It's usually self-love. It's usually healing some traumas. The other cool thing that mushrooms do for me is they show me visions of my future, that if I was to step into my most authentic self, my most courageous self, I could become this. I could do this. And so they kind of paint this picture for me of my future. And then they give me homework of what I should do to step into my greatness, to step into the next evolution of myself. And that's super exciting. For sure.
So going into that, I guess it probably wasn't the did you say was it THC or what was the first one?
The first, I wouldn't consider it a psychedelic. It was just a weed edible, and it was a tiny dose.
Okay.
And
okay. Yeah. So that wasn't a significant one. So I guess fast forwarding from there to your first significant psychedelic experience, can you share that with us?
For sure. Yeah. So there was the acid experience, which was amazing. It was my first proper psychedelic experience. Me and a friend went camping, and I mean, nature is the perfect environment to do this in because you're so connected to nature. And I remember it started raining lightly, and every single drop of rain felt like music on the leaves. Like your perceptions are just so attuned. It's incredible. And there was a funny moment where I saw a slug on the ground, and I crouched down, and I was like communicating with the slug for 10 minutes and just looking at it and thinking, what it's doing is the most important thing to it. Like, I never really realized that before. Like every single ant and creature on the planet, what it's doing is the most important thing to it. Just like what you think you're doing is the most important thing to you. And that level of empathy and that level of connection with other creatures, I feel like that was an amazing moment. And the other thing that happened on that acid trip is I just realized how many layers we're all wearing. The personality we present to the world, it's mostly just a bunch of layers. There is a core truth behind that. And I feel like what psychedelics help me do is each time I do them, more of the masks come off, more of the layers come off. And so I'm able to show up and be seen as just James rather than James with a layer on top.
Yeah, I think that one of the things which, people who haven't done psychedelics, who haven't had that experience, they might think, they might see someone who's tripping on acid or something. And like you said, you can imagine a bystander just looking in and seeing you just like crouching down, watching a slug for 10 minutes, right? And they would think like either this guy has just kind of completely lost his mind or at the very best, it'd say, okay, well, he's tripping, but he's not seeing reality. He's seeing a fiction. He's seeing some kind of, his perception is wrong. Like it's an incorrect perception of the world that you're experiencing, right? But, as well as I do that when you're on a trip, like when you're on an acid trip, like that reality for you is the most real reality. Like you feel like you are seeing, it's almost like kind of, putting on a pair of glasses and seeing in higher focus. It's like seeing everything in HD for the first time. Would that be how you describe the same thing?
100%. Everything is sharper. It's more beautiful. You see more detail in everything. And I love what you mentioned. It's like, it feels more real than reality. It feels like reality is almost like, not to overwhelm our brain, we only see a tiny, tiny fraction of the frequencies available to us. And I feel like when we do acid or shrooms or DMT, it opens you up to the whole range of frequencies. And so, like for me, DMT, you asked about some of my most powerful, profound experiences. Yeah. DMT was the first time I did DMT was life-changing because I had been looking for something like DMT all my life to show me more of the truth of reality. And it was like what we're talking about, the frequency and the energy, that I wanted some sort of proof, but I never had the proof. And I remember the first time I took a hit of DMT, it was actually from a vape pen. So quite a gentle trip, nothing crazy. DMT vape pens, guys, it's next level. And so I take a hit and you just see reality morph in front of you, but you feel like you're looking into the source code of reality. And it's undescribable. It's amazing.
I mean, can you try there? I mean, DMT is something that I've never tried DMT. I want to, but I just haven't really had the opportunity yet. But maybe you'll kind of push me over the edge to make it happen. If you can describe that experience, that'd be awesome.
The best way I can describe it is you realize you're in a hologram or some sort of simulation, and that your body is part of it, your consciousness is part of it, that your consciousness is not localized in your body, but it's actually the entire hologram. And so all you're doing in your day-to-day life is you're just interacting with yourself. And it kind of sounds nuts when you say it when you're sober, but on DMT, it's so clear. The other thing on DMT is you see frequency. It's like, I remember looking at my phone and it became into this holographic 3D display and I could see all the layers of all the pixels. And I was playing music at the time and the little Spotify ticker started slowing down. Like time was literally stretching. And like when you experience things like that, you realize, wow, there's so much more to reality than I could imagine. The amount of mystery. And that was just a small DMT trip. That was like a hybrid experience. So you're still here. You're still in reality, but it looks different. A full-on DMT trip, you're gone. You're not even on this plane anymore. Like the room disappears, everyone disappears. It's just you and your consciousness. So,
wow, it's literally like a direct experience of your own consciousness.
It also feels like dying. Like on a full-on DMT trip, it feels like you have died to your body. But if death was the most beautiful thing in the world, and it kind of removes the fear of death because you realize, oh, I'm still conscious. My body's gone. This is so crazy. So the first time I did the first full-on DMT trip, I asked my friend who was trip sitting, should I keep my eyes open or closed? Because it makes a difference on shrooms. And he said it doesn't matter with DMT. I said, what do you mean it doesn't matter? He's like, keep them open. So I keep them open. He brings the pipe closer to me. He lights it up. I take a good inhale, and the room literally explodes into a million little Minecraft pixels. And I'm gone. I'm in this other world. And I blink and I can feel my eyelashes touching my face, but nothing changes in my vision. Like I'm already seeing that other world. And then within 5 more seconds, even the eyelashes are gone. My hands are gone. My body's gone. And then also you feel that pure love. It feels like a coming home. It feels like you've been there before. This is something I've talked to other people about it, and they feel it too. Is like that deja vu of like, oh, I've been here. Yeah. This feels familiar. Even with my very first trip, which I know I've never done DMT before. Even with the very first trip, I'm like, oh, I've definitely done this before in some lifetime. I've connected with this realm of existence.
Yep. I've had that same thing on acid. I've had the same thing on acid. I felt like the first time I did it, that wasn't the feeling I got. So the first time I did acid, I did about one type of acid, and it was probably, you know, like, I think that's like, obviously I'm not giving advice to people here, but like, certainly for me, that was a good amount to kind of give me a pretty good trip, but without going like so far that you were losing yourself, you know, that you were like, what is reality? Mm-hmm. You know, I did it like after that, I think it might've been like maybe my third trip, and I did like 2 tabs, and that, you know, you really go somewhere there. And that time I got exactly that similar feeling. It was like I had been there before, and you mentioned before as well, when you were describing it, you said that it's almost as if you're interacting with yourself. The entire world is one big interaction with yourself. And that is also the feeling that I had, the sensation, or the kind of, I guess the experience that I had. It was almost like I couldn't tell what was me and what wasn't me. It was like everything was just in this goo of, is it me or isn't it me? There was a complete non-separation there. Yeah. You know, I've also similarly had experiences where I can look at something which I think is a kind of non-natural object, like a rock or a shell or something, and it seems just, I can't tell whether that thing is any more or less alive than something which is objectively alive. There seems to be a liveliness that comes to inanimate objects, or they seem to have their own kind of sense of being, which doesn't avail itself to me when I'm not in the trip. It's almost like everything becomes some kind of a living object. Even my phone, I can look at my phone and be like, this looks like a living object. It looks like a weird alien living object, but it's still living. It's still got some kind of a conscious quality to it. Have you had that?
100%. Yeah. And I feel like, so I see 2 ways of looking at it. One is the scientific way, that if you look at the core part of each object, whether it's inanimate or animate, it's all made of atoms. So if you think an atom is alive, then it actually makes sense that your phone is alive, your table is alive, the rocks are alive. And then the other way I see it is, if you think of life as made up of just pure energy, so your whole hologram is made of energy, then anything that shows up in that hologram, whether it's a phone or an animal or a human or a tree, it all has an energy to it. So yeah, I definitely feel what you described.
Okay, so yeah, you said before about we've kind of gone from that initial like acid trip. I don't think you've actually mentioned your first mushroom trip yet. So do you mind going into that one?
My first mushroom trip wasn't super profound. It was at a festival, so the environment wasn't necessarily the most intentional, because for me, there was too much energy, too many people. And so it was quite a strange experience where I didn't quite know if I was having a good trip or an iffy trip. And I don't really remember the next time I did shrooms, but I remember the moment I started doing shrooms alone, and it was just me, and there was no other energies. That's where I was able to go super deep, and it was more intentional. It connected me so deep to the cosmos. And yeah, so I would say environment for me has been really key. And also the people I'm doing it with. Like these days I tend to do trips solo, just because I feel like you can really let go and dive into your own consciousness without having to, you know, look after other people or make sure that the environment is safe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've done one solo yet, but yeah, I can imagine why that would be awesome. But you mentioned about setting. Like, this is one of the really important things as well, because like, I think that from an outsider's perspective, it's like these kind of things like, oh, you know, you go to a festival, you go to some big event, and you know, there's all of this crazy going on. I've never done it in that environment, and I've always felt like that wouldn't be the right place to do it. I think that these experiences really should be more, you know, obviously I'm not going to prescribe how people should do it, because everyone's going to find their own way. But for me, it's more of an introspective like experience. I think that like having a place where you can contemplate is super important for this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the intention, and maybe like a small, tiny dose. Like if someone just wants to have a little bit more fun and that's their intention, I just want to be entertained, then it makes sense. You could do it at a festival. But I feel like for those who are seeking something deeper from the plants, they're seeking guidance, they're seeking help, then it's probably not the right environment. And I would say do it alone or with a trusted friend, with a trip sitter, in your own space, in your own home, something that feels really comfortable to you. Because when you're at a festival, you have so many energies around you coming in and out. And what I find on shrooms, I'm so sensitive to energy. And you perceive people differently on shrooms. So you might perceive their energy. You might feel more awkward around someone than you would in sober life, you know? So really people, set and setting, I think are really important.
So just kind of like turning it around a little bit, you know, like one of the reasons that a lot of people will be afraid to try psychedelics, you know, and to actually experiment with them would be that they, you know, are afraid of having like a bad trip. I guess, first of all, like, can you maybe speak to some of the bad trips that you've actually had in your kind of experiences with psychedelics, and also like how you contextualize a bad trip more broadly speaking?
Yeah, I believe a bad trip is just a rough trip. There's nothing inherently bad in it other than the meaning we ascribe to it. And most bad trips for me have come from bad environment or the wrong people in my environment. So it's never been the shrooms themselves. And I think that's a really key point, is that when you do these plants, you build a relationship with them. You build a certain trust with them. And so I've never felt betrayed by shrooms. It's always just been something I haven't done on my end, like tripping in the wrong environment or tripping with people that you have complicated relationships with. I think that's really, like, for example, I wouldn't recommend anyone trip with their ex, because all the tensions and all the relationship problems will come up in the trip. You're tripping with another energy. All of that is going to get mixed into it. Yeah. Bad trips for me, I mean, most of my trips have been really good, to be honest.
Okay.
And the few times where it's gone sideways, it was either wrong setting or wrong people, or I freaked out for no reason. So for example, one time I was tripping with friends and the fire alarm went off in their apartment building. And, you know, it's like you're so sensitive to sound, you feel like, oh my God, there might be a real fire. So what I always recommend to people, and always also to myself, is when something seems to go sideways, do nothing. Like, don't run around, don't panic, just surrender to the moment, because more often than not, you're not in any danger, and it's you yourself creating the suffering and creating the panic.
Dude, I really wish that I'd had that advice before I had my bad trip. You know, I mean, I call it a bad trip because it's just, you know, it's the easiest way to term it, basically. I do think that now, looking back on it, it definitely had utility in my life. Like, I did learn from it, and I actually feel like there was aspects of it that were great, but the trip started off really, really bad. Basically, I had a thing, you know, like sometimes well, I mean, always your perception is off. You have kind of things go wrong and things, you know, things that you can't quite figure out or whatever it is. But I kind of got essentially scared by it. You know, like I had an experience of, I went into the kitchen and was just trying to get like a glass of water, right? And I was like, you know, I would kind of put the glass on the side, and then I went to go and get like the ice, and I was like, oh wait, the ice straw is already open. And then, you know, I go back to the glass and I'm like, oh, the ice is already in the glass. I'm like, okay, so that's ready to go. I go to the tap and I'm like, the tap's already running, you know? And then I'm like, oh, okay, forget it. Like, this kind of was going round and round in circles. And I was like, all I wanted to do is just make a glass of water. And I was like there for, you know, probably like 10 minutes. And I couldn't tell, like, was the tap on or off? My perception was off. And then I was thinking, okay, well, if the tap's on, like, is it going to flood? Like, I can't quite trust my own perception that the tap's off. And I started kind of getting, you know, basically this anxiety overcame me, right? And I think that ultimately what maybe happened is I may have had some kind of like anxiety attack, which sent me down like a really bad path. I ultimately kind of recovered from it, like later on, and I actually had an experience of what I literally thought like I'd seen it. You know, I'd seen it, whatever it is. I thought I'd seen it, and I'd had the experience of like pure source or whatever it is. Now looking back, I'm not sure whether I would necessarily contextualize it in that way. Like, I think that looking back on it, it's, you have that experience, but there's something about what's real in that world is real in that world, and what's real in this world is real in this world. Does that make sense? It's almost like it is real when you're in it and when you're having the experience of it, but when you're out of the experience of it, it's no longer real. It kind of like, I know that that's not reality as it is, but when I'm in it, it is reality. Am I making sense here, or am I just speaking words?
No. I think both are real, and you're tuning into different frequencies, different planes of existence. So
Right.
in that moment when you felt enlightened, you connected with something real in that state. But ultimately, when you come back down to planet Earth, you also connect with this
Yeah.
groundedness, you know,
That's
and
exactly
so
it. Yeah.
and we unfortunately, it seems like we can't really bring it back to planet Earth, at least not right away. The way I see it is like it's a North Star. So it's like the shrooms show you what is or the acid, it shows you what is your highest potential. Like here is the purest love, here's the most enlightened state. And then we come back down to Earth. Now we have like a lighthouse, like a North Star that we can follow and try and find our way back to that place of love.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, and you said just there, like, unfortunately, we can't bring it back. But I'm not sure that it's unfortunately. Like, I think that actually witnessing and experiencing that contrast, it kind of is a part of, it's almost like we have, if we were experiencing true bliss and ecstasy all of the time, then we wouldn't know the black and white, right? Like we wouldn't know the up and down, the light and the dark, etc. It's almost like we can have a glimpse of it. We can have a glimpse behind the curtain, but then we have to kind of come back here. Because if you have it all the time, then it wouldn't be bliss. It wouldn't be, you know, it would just be gray. It would just be gray all the time, right? But in order to have these contrasting experience, which ultimately kind of make life what it is, you know, it has to be a peek behind the curtain and not just kind of like stepping in and staying there, right?
One way I like to think of it is if life is a video game, when you have that enlightened state, it's like you're going into God mode and you can see all the controls in the video game and you feel like you can control the whole game. But ultimately, you came for the single player avatar experience. So when you go back into your video game avatar, you encounter limitations, but they're there designed by you, designed by your higher self, because your higher self probably wanted you to experience a more limited version rather than this God mode, a more interesting storyline as an avatar.
That is a really good way of, yeah, I've never heard that before, but that's so true. You know, it is like going into God mode, but then the fun in life ultimately is kind of from knowing that the God world exists, but still operating your day-to-day life and, you know, recognizing, okay, well, there's challenges and there's this and there's that. But like, yeah, if you were there in God mode all the time, then like, you know, what fun would that be?
And I think the reason why DMT has been so powerful for me and shrooms and ayahuasca is you get to connect to that God mode for 6 hours, 8 hours. And you learn all these lessons about what it's like to operate from that level. And then you come back down to the avatar level. And now you're like, okay, I have homework to do, you know?
Mm-hmm. So just going back into your own story a bit, like how was this, how did, you know, your friends and family and stuff kind of, how did they take it when you were going into this, you know, into this psychedelic stuff and you were experimenting and everything? Because, you know, when you first do psychedelics, you kind of want to tell everyone about it. You kind of want to tell all your friends and all your family, but, you know, and you think everyone's going to be like, oh, really? You know, you achieved enlightenment through psychedelics, and you think everyone's going to be high-fiving you. And then you realize that actually people are like, you know, they're nervous about it and they're, you know, they have questions and they're skeptical, etc. So like, how was that for you kind of going through this, you know, this psychedelic kind of turning point in your life? Like, how did those relationships evolve?
I don't think my parents are a fan of my explorations. In terms of friends, I just started gravitating towards people who are more on that path. So, you know, when you meet someone like yourself who has done psychedelics, there's just a connection there. You've both experienced that realm and you're starting on the same page. So I've learned not to preach to anyone, not to try to teach anyone. It's like if someone is ready for it, they've already done it themselves or they're on the path, then I engage in the psychedelic conversation. But what's ended up happening over the years is that most of my friends now, it just so happens that they're all into this in some level of degree. Maybe they're not, like their whole life doesn't revolve around it, but they all get it. And that's the best thing, is when you have a tribe of people who they just get you. They get what you're all about. You don't have to explain. You don't have to justify why it's good or why it's not bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about, you know, stuff like DMT and, you know, acid. I mean, I have done shrooms, but I've done very, very mild shrooms. So I couldn't speak to a full like psilocybin experience, but certainly for like acid and DMT as well, like there's a universal language there, right? Like you can sit next to anyone from whatever culture and whatever background, and you both drop some acid and start looking at stuff, and you're going to have similar perceptions. You're going to see the world in similar ways. And I imagine it with something like DMT, that's even more so. You're literally going into, you're peeling back all of reality, whatever it is, and then you're seeing something completely different. But it doesn't matter what your culture is, you're seeing similar stuff. I mean, or am I speaking too soon on that? Maybe people do see different things. Do you know whether like a Hindu, let's say, who does DMT sees things different to like a Christian or something?
That's a great question. I intuitively feel like people will see, their beliefs will color what they see. So someone who's like super Christian might end up interpreting the data that they're receiving on DMT as angels and as the Christian God, you know, versus someone who is of another religion will experience the same data, but they'll convert it into their language.
Okay.
So I do think it's quite individual, but there's probably a shared aspect between all trips, which is that deep love, that deep connection. So no matter what people call it and how they interpret it, they do feel that deep connection with something divine, even though they might call it different things.
And what about you? What would you call it? Like, how would you describe that that connection, that experience, that like whatever it is that you see there, that you experience there? You know, I mean, like, I don't want to call it like a religious experience, but how do you consider that in your own life?
I'm not religious in the traditional sense, but it has been a religious experience. It's like when I go on these trips, it's like going to church. It's like going to psychedelic church. And it's funny because I used to use the name Source, and now I've started switching to just calling it God. You know, it's like, why be afraid of a label just because some other people put baggage on it? To me, God is God, you know, and it's like you just get it on a cellular level. The other thing that I keep getting on the shrooms and the ayahuasca and other psychedelics is that we are also pieces of God. So when you're connecting with God, you are in a sense connecting with yourself because of that unity, because we're all one. Yeah. Have you also experienced that unity?
I mean, yeah, I definitely have. I mean, it's just, I guess the struggle that I have with, you know, certainly, I mean, for me, it was really, there was one psychedelic trip, which was way head and shoulders above the others in terms of the actual like depth of the experience. And in that experience, I would say that like I struggled with the idea that I was having an experience which was almost like experiencing myself, as everything, and there being kind of no separation there. As I was kind of coming out of it, I was like, well, what does this mean? Like, are these people, are they me? Like, you know, it was almost like, how do I, like, if everybody has the experience of complete unity, as in I am everything and everything is me, how can that be true for everybody? How can it not only be true for one person? Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think that's one of my bigger questions is, how can you have this experience that literally everything is a part of you?
Yeah.
You know, but you know they're not. You know that everyone else has their own subjective experience, and for them, everything is a part of them.
Well, here's a metaphor. Imagine one of your fingers started tripping on DMT, and it connected to the whole body. And for 10 glorious minutes, your finger felt like it was the whole body. And then it came back down to earth and realized, oh, I'm just a finger. And then your other finger started doing the same thing and also connected to the whole body. So both fingers are experiencing the unity, and they're both uniquely separate. But in some sense, they're also connected to the whole body. I feel like that might explain how we can all connect to that unity and yet all have our own individual little holograms.
That's a really good way of describing it. Yeah, I guess these are some of the questions that I hope to go deeper into, you know, kind of going like further down into like experimenting with psychedelics. But yeah, for now, that like, it's a profound experience that's really difficult to describe. And, you know, I think that probably if people are listening who haven't tried psychedelics, this conversation might seem really, really weird. Like, what the hell are these guys talking about? But for someone who has experimented with psychedelics, they're probably like, they're articulating it complete, they're asking all the same questions and having all the same kind of insights that I've had, like it brings about, because it is so profound and there is no kind of language to actually communicate the experience itself. It's like it's almost like language is a layer below the experience. So you can try to make metaphors about the experience, but you can't actually tackle it directly. Language won't directly be able to explain the experience. You have to have the experience to explain it, right?
100%. I remember doing DMT, one of my most profound trips ever, and coming back and journaling about it and writing as much detail as I could. And then over time, I realized when I would tell the story of that DMT trip, I was referring more and more to my notes, and I was losing touch with the actual experience, because the actual experience kind of fades away like a dream. So then all you have is the words that you translated. And yeah, that's just one of the aspects, I guess. Of
Yeah. Man, just as a total side note, when we're talking about this stuff, do you almost feel like you're going back there a little bit, like you're getting almost like flashbacks just when you have the conversations? There's some connection there that you're like, I'm touching it again. Because what you just said there, that completely rings true for me. When I've had like intentional psychedelic experiences, one of the things I often do is like I'm going into it, I'm like, oh, you know what? Like I want to listen to this piece of music on it. I want to go in and listen to this piece of music because it's going to sound amazing. Or, I want to go in and I want to read this, or I want to read that quote, or whatever it is. And then once I'm in the experience, that all seems so wrong. And that all seemed like everything that I've written down, not wrong, but it just seems so insignificant. It's like, well, you're in the experience. What more could you want? You're in the experience. All this stuff you've written down about you want to try, it doesn't matter. You could just be sat on a chair doing absolutely nothing, and you'll have just as good an experience as if you're listening to a crazy piece of music or whatever. Like the experience itself is what you're there for, and all of your preconceptions about how you want it to be, how you want it to go, like that all kind of goes out the window. The experience guides you, and if you try to guide it, like I think that's where you maybe take a wrong path when you're trying to be too, being intentional is good, but trying to force a certain experience. Oh, I want a certain insight. It's going to teach you a lesson, right? Like it teaches you, you don't teach it.
Yeah, I always tell people go with no expectations. Even myself, I've had, dozens and dozens of incredible trips, but every time I do a new trip, no expectations. I have no idea if I'm going to get cool visuals, if I'm going to feel enlightened, if I'm going to feel, and I just let go. And I think that surrender aspect is also important. Going with the flow of the trip, not trying to prescribe how the trip should go. So what I'll do usually in my trips is I'll have like a 4-hour to 6-hour mix of music that kind of keeps me grounded, keeps me flowing. But everything else, I leave it up to the universe. And I might have an intention too. That's also important. So music, and then like a key intention, like what do I want to learn? What do I want to work on? And sometimes it's quite broad. Sometimes it's show me what I most need to know. Show me what I most need to learn about myself. So it can be as general as you want. And I feel like those two things, and plus the good environment, basically that's all you need. And then just amazing insights and downloads come up and things you couldn't predict. And yeah.
Can you go into like some of those insights, like I guess just more like tangible insights that you've actually had?
Yeah, well, the 1 billion humans mission came out directly from my ayahuasca experience.
Okay, let's go into I do want to talk about the 1 billion human stuff. So let's talk about the ayahuasca experience for now. And then if it's cool with you, we'll loop back to the 1 billion humans.
For sure, yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because I want to hear all about the ayahuasca experience. So if they're inseparable, then just like go for it. But yeah, I really want to know about this experience.
Ayahuasca was one of the most profound trips for me. The deepest, the most soul affirming. I'm so happy I did it. And it came about in a very synchronistic way. I was in Canada. I got the ping that I should go to Bali. This was actually on shrooms. The shrooms kept telling me, you got to go to Bali. So I'm like, okay, we're leaving Canada. Bali's closed to the whole world at the time. So I'm like, which country is open? Mexico was open, which is how we met. And later on in Mexico, I meet another friend, and he's doing ayahuasca in 10 days. And he's done it with his shaman 10 times before. So I'm like, wow, if you trust your shaman, to do it 10 times, then that seems like a trustworthy person. And I'd always wanted to do it, but I never specifically sought it out. And here it was finding me. And so we go to the shaman. It's like a
Wait,
little
this is
group.
in Bali after you left Mexico?
No, this was in Mexico City.
Oh, you did it. I didn't know you did it in Mexico. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I really wanted to do it somewhere in South America because the plant is indigenous to that region of the world. And so I wanted to do it with a shaman who was indigenous. I wanted to do it somewhere either in Mexico or Peru or Guatemala. And so I was really happy
I don't think it's indigenous here though, is it? Mexico is still North America. I think
Oh,
they
yeah.
bring it. I think they bring it up, but a lot of the shamans are from like Peru and I think even Colombia and stuff like that. They have them. But yeah,
You may
I'm
be
not
right.
entirely sure. But I know there's a lot of like a lot of people come to Mexico to do it, and I know like a bunch of people who have done it here. So, and yeah, even around Mexico City apparently is a great place. And you know, I do think they have a tradition of it as well. Like I think the Aztecs and the Mayans might have been into that kind of stuff, or at least some kind of psychedelic stuff. So yeah, there's certainly a history. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, like for me, the integrity of the shaman was the most important. And you kind of just feel it out when you meet someone. You understand, do I want this person guiding my trip? What is their energy like? And I felt really good about the shaman. And, the first 2 hours of the trip, I thought I had made a huge mistake because I felt so much grief, so much raw emotion was coming up. I was like, wow, if this is going to be this for the next 8 hours, I'm not going to survive tonight. It was a lot. And so much more intense than I anticipated. I mean, I knew it was going to be intense, but my God, this was next level. And then I remembered my shroom trips. And with shrooms, I'm sure you can relate, there's like an arc to a trip. It might start off a little dodgy, then you find your wings, then you're soaring, then you're gliding, and then you like come back down to earth. So I thought maybe this is the dodgy part. Maybe the intense grief and sadness I'm feeling, this is part of the trip and I got to experience it and I'm going to stay calm, even though it's really hard. I had a little notebook. I was like scribbling words just to keep myself grounded. And then it started switching. It started flowing into a more happy place. And something interesting happened. I wanted to go back to the raw place of grief. I was like, wait, that was interesting. So in the grief, get me out of this. I don't want to feel this. This is too much. As soon as I started getting out of it, I'm like, wait, I've never felt raw grief like that. And that was important. I was connecting with maybe my inner child, maybe some traumas, maybe some wounds that needed to be felt, that had not been felt for years and years. And so then from that point on, it turned from what I thought was going to be maybe my worst trip into one of the best trips of my life. Yeah. And the amount of downloads I got was insane.
So it's not just one night, right? Like it's a series of nights that
That
you
one
do.
in particular was one night. So
Okay, it was one
it
night.
depends which retreat or which shaman you go with. Sometimes they do like, let's say 4 in a row. So you're there for the whole weekend. But the one I went to was one night. You start at 10 p.m., you end at around 5 a.m. And then in the morning you wake up and you have a little sharing circle. And then that's it, which was fine by me. I after one trip, I was like, wow, this is this is all I need. This is amazing.
And yeah, I guess like after that initial experience where you were having the grief, etc., and you went into that more elevated phase of the trip. What was that like for you? What were the actual insights you were getting? What were the visuals? I mean, I don't really know that much about ayahuasca other than everyone describes it as being like normally the most profound experience of their life. But yeah, what is it like if you can try to describe what you're seeing and what you're feeling, etc.
I'll describe it, but before I do, I want to say that I did 2 other ceremonies after the first one with a different shaman. And I have to say, every single journey has been so unique and so different, which really surprised me. Because with shrooms, you kind of see a pattern to it, and with acid as well. But with ayahuasca, it was like getting 3 different PhDs from Plant Medicine University, like completely different lessons, completely different visuals. So my experience, what I'm going to describe, might not fit, what someone else might experience. For me, that first ceremony was more emotional than visual. I was actually really surprised. There was not as many visuals as even on shrooms, but it was so emotional. I felt like my heart was being opened. I was connecting to self-love. A lot of things around my purpose were coming up. Like, why am I here on this planet? What am I here to do? And I think that ties back to my intention, because when I went into that first journey, I had a very specific intention around purpose. I wanted to know what I came here to do. And when you ask these things of the plant medicine, you should never expect a specific answer, because it might give you some other thing to work on. But the cool thing with Aya is that not only did it give me exactly specific answers around what I'm here to do, but then also gave me other surprising insights around my life. A lot of it around self-love, a lot of it around purpose. Like the podcast I started also came out of that. I'd always wanted to do one, but I felt like ayahuasca cleared the blocks, cleared the limiting beliefs I had, and allowed me to step into that. It also gave me a lot of reinvigorated my connection with life. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So if you're a regular listener to the show, then you might remember a recent episode that I did with Alex Zek, which was episode 46, called The Viral Myth and Evolving Beyond the Paradigm of Deception. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I really recommend you go and check it out. We talk about a lot of interesting ideas regarding virology and illness and how we can take control over our own health. And more recently, someone from Alex's team got in touch with me about an educational event that they're going to be doing, which I definitely think is going to interest a lot of you guys. So it's called The End of COVID, and it's an online education designed for the way in which we consume content today. Similar to a podcast, they've recorded over 100 hours of interviews, presentations, and conversations with prominent voices from the likes of David Icke, Kelly Brogan, Amanda Vollmer, Tom Cohen, Andrew Kaufman, Christiane Northrup, and many, many more. This event launches on July the 11th. I had a look through the program, and as well as these very prominent guests, a few that jumped out to me were Alex Zek himself, Jesse Zurewell and Patrick Henningsen from TNT Radio, Dr. Melissa Sell, Nick Hudson, and Etienne de la Bote Squared. So if this sounds like something that interests you, please do use my referral link. That's theendofcovid.com/ref/606. That's theendofcovid.com/ref/606. That will be in the show notes anyway. And on that website, you can check out all about it. There's a trailer there. There's a bunch of information. You can see all the speakers and see what the event's about. And if you do decide that this is going to be of value for you and you end up signing up to get access to the program, please do use my referral code, and that will help to support my content as well. All right, back to the episode. What do you think about the actual nature of having these plants interact with the human mind in the way that they do? Like, every time I think about that concept, it just kind of blows my mind. Like, the idea that these plants seem to kind of interoperate with our consciousness in some way. Like, yeah, how deeply have you thought about that?
That's a great question. I have no idea how they cooperate, other than it feels like they take your intelligence and their own intelligence and they combine the two. So it's almost like when I do any plant medicine, it feels like it scans my entire brain and it gets all the data it knows about me, every single shadowy aspect, every single light aspect, all the BS I'm not looking at, all the things, all my potential, and then it applies its own intelligence to my life and shows me my life from a broader point of view. So it's like, I was talking about this with a friend. It's almost like ChatGPT. So you are the prompt. The plant medicine is ChatGPT. It's applying its knowledge to your prompt, to you, and that outputs certain advice. And then it's like a dialogue between you and the plants.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a dialogue between you and the plants, but it also is a dialogue with yourself.
Yeah. And this is the thing. Sometimes I can't tell where one begins and one starts. There are mushroom trips where I feel like I'm mostly just talking with my own subconscious, and which is amazing. It's super helpful. And there's other trips where I distinctly feel like there's this other energy helping me, guiding me.
Ah, interesting. And okay. Yeah.
I don't know what I haven't cracked the code on the mechanics of it, other than both of them are really helpful and really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for me with like my acid experiences, like I've definitely felt like that is an experience I'm having of something deep within myself. I'm having an experience of my own consciousness in some way. And the deeper I go into it, it's almost like, it's almost like experientially, it feels to me similar to, if you've ever kind of had a mirror in front of you and had a mirror behind you, like if you're in the hairdressers or something and they show you a mirror and then you see the mirror through the other mirror, and then you kind of see that it's infinite, you know, like, and at a certain point it's like, well, there's just a tunnel of mirrors that's just going on infinitely. I would describe acid and the experience of your consciousness similar to that, where it's just like an infinite kind of fractal of mirrors, basically. Like, you know,
I love that.
you are everything, everything is you, you're reflecting everything, everything's kind of being reflected back. And yeah, like, and every action that you take as well. I mean, this was one of my experiences, was like the smallest action, you know, moving my arm, moving my head, looking at something, whatever it is, it was all part of this kind of wider tapestry where that was the only possible action. It was like the perfect action. Everything was kind of preordained for that action. Like the whole history of the universe had, you know, led up to this moment of me putting my pen on the table, kind of thing. You know, that's the kind of experience, you know, that I've had on acid. I don't know if you've had similar experiences like that as well.
You know what you remind me of? There's this quote by Alan Watts. I think it was Alan Watts. He talks about the Big Bang, and we think of the Big Bang as something that happened. But Alan Watts was saying that, no, it's still happening. You are the little tendril at the end of the Big Bang. Billions of years later, you are still happening, and the Big Bang is still happening. And that kind of blew my mind. He kind of made this metaphor as like if you throw a can of paint at the wall, and that's the Big Bang, that's the explosion on the wall. But then all the little tendrils of paint that are coming down the wall, that's you billions of years later.
Yeah, it's all part of the same event, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that reminded me of another thing that Alan Watts, I heard him say, where he was kind of describing the nature of like reality. And, you know, he obviously talks a lot about you and the universe being inseparable. And one of the examples that he gave in one of his lectures was like, if you have a spider web and it's got, you know, like when it's, we call it dew. I don't know if is that an English word, dew? When you have like the kind of like wet, you know, in the morning you get dew when it's like the kind of wetness on the spider's web. And if it's a cold morning, you'll see all these kind of like tiny little droplets of water basically on the spider's web. And each one of these droplets is reflecting the rest of the spider's web, right? But if one of them bursts, if one of these droplets, you know, drops, it affects the reflection in all of the others, right? So that one has kind of been lost as a point of consciousness, but every single other one has reflected it. So they're all kind of inseparable in some way because everything is reflecting everything else. So as soon as one goes, that's changed everything. Like everything is just a reflection of everything else, essentially. And these kind of concepts that seem weird to talk about in waking life, they really like have a kind of profound depth to them when thoughts always seem to go in that direction, at least for me. It seems to steer itself to these ideas of like, you know, what is life? What is the universe? What is existence? Like, you know, all of these questions suddenly become like so interesting, but you almost feel like you're getting some answers to them, but without necessarily trying to sit down and, you know, do it intellectually. It's just the pure experience of the answers to those questions.
I love what you say about the spider web. To me, it reminds me of the ripples that we all create in each other's lives. Every single thing we do, whether it's kind or unkind, it's sending out ripples into the universe. And it always comes back to you because it's your hologram. So, you know, whatever energy you send out, it comes back to you. And it's so apparent on the shrooms and on acid of how everything is connected and not one single event is out of order. It's all somehow linked to another event. It's linked to your energy. There's all these synchronicities running through it. I like what Robert Edward Grant talks about synchronicity as it's just the patterns of life that when we're in them, it feels like random. But when we zoom out, you actually see there's a macro pattern to the universe.
Yeah. That's totally true. I was going to mention, actually, I don't know if you've seen this documentary on Netflix. It's called A Trip to Infinity. Have you seen it?
No.
Man, you got to watch this documentary. Like it's this film actually it goes into the nature of infinity as a concept, and it kind of tries to like describe infinity through essentially kind of like graphical representations. So it's all like kind of motion graphics and stuff, and it's got a few interviews and talking heads, and then it'll go into these like, you know, really amazing like graphical representations of the nature of infinity. And when you watch this, like it really is like a trip. It really is like a trip. I mean, you know, it's awesome. And I definitely think that like when I was watching it, I was like, I feel like I'm tripping. You know?
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah,
I'll check it out.
check it out. Recommended. So, you know, you mentioned before about integration and like how you integrate the trip, right? It's not just about kind of going and just having an experience and then kind of walking away from it being like, oh, that was fun. How do you integrate properly your experiences? And yeah, can you just speak to that for a bit?
Yeah, so on the trips, I'll get insights around my life and where I need to be going and what I need to be working on. And oftentimes I'll get specific action steps from the shrooms that tell me, like, oh, I need to go and make amends with this person. I need to go apologize to this person. I need to connect with this person. And so the homework becomes, when I'm back on the planet Earth, the homework then becomes to execute on those action steps. The other way that it shows up is that, I think we talked about this, like on the shrooms, I see a vision of who I could be if I was more authentic and more courageous. And when I come back down to earth, it's figuring out how can I achieve that? How can I hold that state? So like a good example, I think, is the podcast that I do, because I never wanted to be on camera, like when I was growing up, and I was camera shy, and I guess it stemmed from a fear of being seen. And of course, the thing you're afraid of, the universe is going to circle back to you and put you in the exact position to work on that. And so, you know, through shrooms and through ayahuasca, I started seeing that, okay, if I want to have an impact on planet Earth, I need to allow myself to be seen, and I need to allow myself to be filmed. And so then the homework becomes, the integration becomes actually doing the work, you know, actually making your first YouTube video, making your first podcast, doing the thing that scares you a little bit, but now you've gotten this validation from the shrooms or from Aya that tells you that it's possible, that something good is going to come out of this.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I'm glad that it gave you that experience, because yeah, the pod is really great. We'll get into it. We'll get into it in a little bit, but yeah, I think, you know, it kind of, it checks your ego, right? Like it checks your ego. And, you know, some people might think, oh, well, you know, you want to be on camera, you want to be heard all the time. Like you must have like a big ego. But for a lot of people, it's the opposite. Like they don't, you know, you don't want to be on camera, and you don't want to be listened to, because you're like, well, I don't want to be judged for what I say. You know, I want everyone to like me. And, you know, if I put myself out there, what if I say the wrong thing, etc. Like, I don't think there's actually any relationship there, like between, like, you know, some people, okay, for sure, you might get some egotistical people who go, oh, you know, I want to be an influencer, I want to be a YouTuber, whatever it is, you know, just for the sake of it. You know, I've not got anything really to give. I just want to be known. I want to be famous. But, you know, it's not necessarily the case. Some people, you know, they're having conversations, they like talking and stuff. Like, you know, me doing this, I just love having conversations with people, like interesting conversations. I love the way that it allows me to like connect to a community. I love the way that, you know, it brings people into my life, you know, who I might never have met before, you know, and it kind of, it offers a lot in that respect. But, you know, like you said, sometimes what might look egotistical is actually the opposite of it. It's actually letting go of caring about what people think about you and just going, okay, like, I'm just going to go into this. I'm just going to have conversations and, you know, do what I want to do and not feel like I'm kind of guarding myself from the world.
Yeah. So I always like to look at it as the 3D is the symbolism, but what is the meaning behind it? So let's say I'm on camera. That's the 3D symbol. But the actual meaning is, am I allowing myself to be authentic? Or when I show up on camera, am I wearing a mask? Right. And so I always like to go a few layers deep of what is the actual journey for the soul? How is this training my soul? So for me personally, it's the being seen aspect, allowing other people to see me as I am. It's also finding one's voice, right? So oftentimes, because of past traumas or failures, we dim our own light, and we say, okay, I'm just going to be in my little corner. I'm not going to interact with the world. I'm just going to do my own thing. And life doesn't really reward that. Life kind of likes to see you step out of your comfort zone and create more positive ripples in your entire hologram, not just in your own little personal hologram. And yeah, so I feel like always looking at the meaning behind the symbol of what someone is doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, man. It's, yeah, a lot of the time I think that people are really, really scared of actually kind of like taking risks and taking chances and stuff in life, and just feeling like I've got to got to do what's within the norm and what's kind of accepted and not go too far out of that. But actually, like, you know, from everyone that I know in my experience of the world and stuff, I just think I like people who actually go, no, I'm not going to just stay where it's comfortable. I'm going to have like different experiences. You know, I'm not going to be afraid to do that. And I'm going to kind of like seek truth in my life and seek meaning and stuff. Like, normally you find it, right? You know, I mean, I just think if it's not that you find it like this perfect, you know, thing that you might have had a preconceived notion of, but it's more just like you're going to like over time go through life and just have so many more experiences that just kind of guide you to where you're meant to be. Right. And personally, I think that psychedelics is part of that. And it can be the catalyst that allows people to actually kind of go into that and to kind of have the courage to go into that space.
Let me ask you, do you feel like there's a destiny path for each individual?
That's a good question, man. Yeah, I think there is. But then there's a part of me that also thinks that, is it possible to not live your destiny? I'm not sure that's possible either. So I'm not sure I believe, like, you know, if people like they're on the deathbed and like, oh, you know, I should have been a whatever, I wanted to be an actress or whatever it is. I'm not sure, like, if they didn't do it, it wasn't their destiny. So I think that there is a destiny, but it's whatever it is. It's whatever you're experiencing. That is your destiny. Now you can do different things through your life that would maybe change how that emerges. But whatever you live, I do believe that is ultimately a destiny. What about you? What do you think?
I feel like there's the highest destiny path. So it's the thing that if you were to achieve your highest potential, and that is your destiny, and life is trying to guide you towards that. But ultimately, we have total free will. So if we choose not to go there, we will have a different experience. And ultimately, there is no right or wrong. But I feel like what I experience from psychedelics is I'm constantly being shown the better version of myself. And it's like this beam of light sort of guiding me to step more and more into my higher destiny path.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. Do you feel like that is a way of looking at the world that has come to you through psychedelics?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's funny that you say that, actually, because I was gonna touch back on like the kind of good and bad trip stuff. Is that I've kind of had these experiences before, like on psychedelics, where I know they say don't look in it. I don't know if you heed this advice or not, but like, you've probably heard the advice, like, don't look in a mirror when you're on acid. You ever done it?
I've done it on shrooms.
Okay, right, yeah. I'm interested to know what your experience was with that, because for me, I basically saw myself oscillate between the kind of most disgusting, ugly, like worst possible version of myself and like pure divine, what I would... It was almost like seeing a kind of Christ-like figure, and then it was oscillating towards like an ultimate evil. But it was oscillating literally by the second. It was like I couldn't quite capture the exact moment, but it was going from these two extreme levels, and that was almost like a reflection of, you know, this trip can be what you want. You can go into have this arc of like beauty, or if you go down a bad tunnel, you know, you get anxious, you follow like bad thoughts, etc. You're going to go to like the evil side, and it was almost like a visual kind of representation of that. And yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe like going into these trips with the right intention, that is showing you, okay, what is it to be the most pure, beautiful form of yourself? But I also think that it can show you the worst of yourself as well. I'm interested to know what you think about that.
Yeah. It has shown me the shadowy aspects of myself as well, but always with love. I feel like it's showing me all of my BS. Like, these are the parts of you that you don't want to look at, and you're going to look at it. Especially ayahuasca is amazing at doing that. It's like the ultimate teacher of calling you out on your BS and just showing you everything that you promised you would do, but you didn't. Everything that, like all of your shadowy aspects. And I feel like it's done in love. It's done to wake you up to that, yes, there are these aspects of you that are not, let's say, pure light, and that we are all part of, you know, we have the dark, we have the light. Ultimately, we have the free will to go in which direction we want to go in. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess like, yeah, ultimately, like the interpretations are so vast that you can have from these experiences. It's kind of hard to just like narrow down to one, because you know, literally all of these interpretations are kind of like possible at the same time, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like they're always guiding me to personal growth. So whether it's showing me the light aspects of myself or the shadow aspects, it's all done in service of training my soul and of giving me some sort of lessons, some sort of wisdom.
What do you think have been the most important learnings that you've had, if you were to distill them down, like that you've actually come to through psychedelics?
Definitely. So one powerful lesson I learned recently was the surrender aspect, surrendering to life. That when things are going sideways and it feels like everything's going wrong, surrender to that flow, because you never know, it might actually turn out to be a good thing in the end. Another big lesson, I think, is connecting more with my power. You know, we are the directors of our life. And in a victim mindset or a depressed mindset, we often choose to say, no, I'm not the director. Things are happening to me. People are doing this and that to me. But the psychedelics have always reminded me to claim your own power, claim the director hat, you know, and be like, okay, I am creating all of this. What is the next best step in my life that I can do? And then the love aspect. I feel like this is universal across all the plants, all the plant medicines, is connecting with love, realizing that all it is, everything you're doing is for love, whether it's to get closer to loving yourself or getting closer to loving other people or opening your heart to the whole world. Yeah.
So now that we've kind of, discussed like all of these positive benefits of these, plant medicines and stuff, like the reality on the ground is very different, right? Like they're basically banned in pretty much every country. I mean, I don't even know what the legality here is of doing like ayahuasca and stuff. Certainly like the government don't seem to like it. And I've heard that, they've arrested people for doing it and stuff. It seems kind of crazy that like something that's been used historically, it's been used like for thousands of years in tribes and everything, that is, a personal experience, has only effect on yourself, and generally very positive effects for people who actually do it under the right circumstances. And yet like they're basically illegal pretty much everywhere. Like, how do you think about that? Do you just think it's kind of, hubris, ignorance, or, do you think there's something darker at play there?
I think it's absurd. I think it's absurd to ban plants for personal use, especially plants that have so many benefits for our consciousness and for our psyche and for becoming a better human being. So I'm not sure if there's like a dark conspiracy or something that is preventing, that is banning these substances. It could just be ignorance. It could be a mix of both. I like this quote by Terence McKenna. I think I shared it with you before. So Terence McKenna has this amazing quote, which goes like this: "Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. They're illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong." And so, like, I've noticed through my own psychedelic use how much more I think for myself and how much more sovereign I've become. Right. And probably governments don't want millions of people connecting deeply with their soul and getting guidance from themselves. They probably like it when people turn to an outside authority, because then they're easier to control. And the other thing that psychedelics do is they dissolve fear. They're really good at dissolving fears. But the thing is, if a population is not in some level of fear, it's harder to control. You want the population to be mildly stressed out and mildly afraid every moment of every day, so you can easily sway them. If everyone's connected to love and to their heart, then you can't rule them. because they're fine without you. So that's sort of where I see it.
I saw a documentary once. I wish I could remember the name of it. I don't know who the original guys were, but there was these original like psychedelics guys back in, I think it was the 60s or something. One of them was Timothy Leary, I think. And there was another 2 or 3. And one of them, I can't remember which it was, had this idea that he was like, he wanted to basically contaminate the water of like world leaders, you know, like the White House and stuff like that. He wanted to like contaminate it with like acid so that they would like trip, and like hopefully, you know, he wanted to like raise the consciousness of like governments and the people and stuff. And he wanted to basically like turn everyone on and be like, oh, okay, you know, we can avoid nuclear. I think at this time it was the whole kind of communism, capitalism thing. And there was the Russia and America kind of like Cold War stuff going on. And he wanted to like turn on the whole world. Have you heard much about this story?
I've heard bits and pieces of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a super interesting story. I wish that I could name the documentary now, but like, that is kind of how you feel, right? Like especially the first time you do psychedelics, you're just like, you want the whole world to like know, you want the whole world to understand. You're like, oh my God, there's this depth that there's this door that people aren't opening, you know, and it's right there and it's like available to us.
Yeah, I think I definitely would love it if more of the world experienced psychedelics, but they have to do it from their own desire to do it, right? If someone just contaminates the water with acid, I don't think people will have the experience that you want them to have. I think they're going to have a very scared experience, and it's going to turn them off psychedelics for the rest of their life.
I'm not going to advocate for that one personally.
Yeah. But if you do it with education and you say, look, these are just some of the tools available to you. You don't need to use them. You could do breath work. You could do meditation. You could go do yoga in Nepal, you know, or in India. You can connect with the divine and with yourself through various ways, but here is a tool that is proven to work really well for most people. Whether it's MDMA therapy or ayahuasca, or like, these are things that they work. And of course, I would love it if more people were educated about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I'm just not convinced that I think you could spend your lifetime meditating, you know, in a cave alone, and I'm just not sure that you will ever come close to like a full-on psychedelic experience. Maybe I'm being a bit like unfair there, but it's just, I just don't see how it can get there. Like, do you really think you can get to the same level of consciousness?
I wonder about that. I haven't personally. I've met some people who claim to be able to go on these vision adventures during their meditations that are similar to ayahuasca. Okay. But I sort of agree with you in the sense that I feel like, look, there's these tools available to you. You may as well try them and use them. But yeah, for me, meditation, I'm not an expert in meditation, so I can't say I've experienced something like that. What I experienced in ayahuasca and DMT, I can't imagine experiencing it through meditation, but perhaps it's possible. Yeah.
All right, man. Let's talk about the podcast first before we get into the 1 billion. What's it called? The 1 billion humans mission? Is that
1 billion humans mission? Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the pod first. First of all, I love your pod, man. Like, it's really, really good. I'm not just saying that because you're a friend. Like, I didn't even know you were doing a podcast, and then I started seeing like the videos you were putting on Instagram. And at first I thought that you were maybe promoting for someone else's thing. I wasn't just quite sure what was going on. And then I was like, oh man, like, this is your podcast. And yeah, I've listened to all the episodes, and yeah, it's awesome, man. It's kind of brought me back round to, you know, this psychedelic stuff, which previously, you know, I kind of go in and out of having a lot of interest in. Like, sometimes I'm really interested in it, and sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't really thought about it in a while. But after listening to your podcast, it just really got me hyped for this whole thing, because, you know, your conversations are awesome. You're definitely a natural at it. So whatever the ayahuasca told you about, like, you should do a podcast, like, it nailed it.
Amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So just feel free to, you know, let my listeners know what it's all about, what you're trying to achieve with the podcast, you know, what are the kind of conversations that you're having. You know, hopefully it'll be of interest to some of my listeners as well.
Yeah, so I run a podcast called the James Xander Trip. And if
Love the name, by the way. I like that. I
Yeah,
really
you
like
got.
the name.
Thank you so much. So yeah, it's a trip, and in my podcast, the topics I go into with my guests is spirituality, mindset, personal growth, and the golden thread is usually psychedelics. So with every guest, I bring up their experiences with mushrooms, their experiences with ayahuasca, and the goal is not just to talk about quote unquote drugs. It's to talk about how psychedelics can bring us closer to our soul, how they can open up our heart. Because I deeply believe that the deeper we can connect with ourselves, the deeper we can connect to others. You can only relate to someone as deeply as you've gone into your own psyche. And for me, psychedelics have been so impactful in opening my heart, in overcoming depression, in putting me on my highest destiny path. And so I love having these deep, deep conversations with people around spirituality, psychedelics, mindset. Also, there's a little bit of entrepreneurship that I mix into it because it's something I'm also passionate about. And so it's a mix of the 3D and the 5D, and kind of ties into the mission of let's educate more people around psychedelics and let's inspire people to do it intentionally, to do it safely, and to have fun with it, to learn something, to grow from it.
So that ties nicely into the 1 billion humans mission. So what is the 1 billion humans mission?
The 1 billion humans mission is let's get 1 billion people on the planet connected with their hearts, connected to plant medicine, educated about psychedelics, and let's get 1 billion people to take mushrooms on the same day, at the same time, worldwide, and see what happens to the planet's frequency, because I think something crazy will happen if we actually pull it off.
This could either be like the best thing ever, or it could just be the plot of, like a Hollywood movie, like a disaster movie, like planes falling out of the sky. Like,
well, I should say no one who's flying a plane should be part of this mission, at least not today. But I feel like, okay, I'm imagining the next morning, you go to get your coffee and you look around and you're like, were you part of the 1 billion? Did you do mushrooms last night? Could be really fun.
Yeah, 1 million's a lot of people as well. That's it. I like how you've set the bar that high, like probably, I don't know what the record is for the most people tripping at the same time, but it's probably like, I don't know, in one place, maybe like a festival of like 100,000 people, but you've gone straight to 1 billion. You've skipped the million, you've skipped the 10 million. You're just like, nah, straight for broke.
I think if 1 in 8 people were to connect to plant medicine regularly and intentionally, it would just be a whole different world. So we don't need 8 billion people to do it, but we need a shift. We need some sort of a majority of the population to, not even a majority, but just the 1/8 of the planet. If there's enough momentum and there's enough people that start doing this, I truly feel like it'll be a different world. Yeah. For example, if you're connected to the guidance from within and to God and to your own heart, can you really pick up a weapon and go shoot someone in another country? Mm-hmm. Right? It's only through our disconnection with ourselves that we are allowing ourselves to be manipulated into doing other things that are violent. But when you love yourself, when you are in touch with your divinity, and you're also in touch with the unity of the planet, the unity of your hologram, you cannot hurt anyone because you're just hurting yourself. Mm-hmm. And, I have to talk about the inception of the 1 billion humans mission because I feel like it's so important.
Yeah, please do.
When I was doing ayahuasca, that very first trip, and I was feeling grief around my life, but I was also feeling grief around the division that was happening around the world at the time. That you had, governments pitting one group of people against another. You had restrictions, you had lockdowns, you had people with varying opinions about the same thing. And I felt so much grief around it because we're all one family on one planet. And how can it be that whether it's the governments or people themselves, how can it be that we've disconnected from each other so much that we're calling one group of people names and the other group of people is calling the other group names? And so I asked Mother Aya, the plant energy, I said, what can we do to unite the planet? Because books don't work unless you're ready for them. Gurus don't work. A politician, a leader, not going to work? What is actually going to make a difference? And I got this clear download that, well, what worked for you? What connected you to yourself? And it was the plant medicine. And so from that, I think on the ayahuasca, everything is so heightened. So I think that's why I went straight to 1 billion because I was like, okay, just imagine for a second if 1 billion people experienced the benefits of mushrooms the way that I experienced it, in their own individual way, with their own journey with it, with their own healing. How different would the planet be? And it just, like, the vision of it was so strong and so powerful that I was like, I have to do this. And it's a lifelong mission. And, we're going to start with, 10,000 people and then work our way up to 1 million. And then hopefully one day the whole planet. I also feel like it's inevitable. I feel like if we're going to move into the 5D consciousness and we're going to move into closer connection with ourselves and with God, it will happen eventually, whether it's in my lifetime or past my lifetime. Eventually, everyone will know the truth. Everyone will know the truth about themselves, the truth about their connection with God, the truth about their connection with the cosmos. And I feel like psychedelics will play a huge role in that, but I'm also open to other tools helping along the way.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, the mission sounds great, dude. Like, I think that if you can get 1 billion people to do this, that's gonna be amazing. But just the idea of everyone doing this thing together, I love it. Like the idea that, like you said, people just sharing this experience together. Because it's almost like, sometimes if you're on a trip and you have a few people like in a room or whatever, you do feel like you share that. You have this kind of depth. You have like an understanding between you. Obviously, sometimes it can go the other way. Sometimes it doesn't feel right. But, it does have that. And if the whole world is there, like in that same space, you could unite a lot of people through that. So I think they're doing these like synchronized trips. It's got something to it, I think.
It's also the group intention. So
yeah,
imagine not just tripping for the sake of tripping, but let's say we all hold the intention of love or the intention of raising the consciousness of humanity. If you have 1 billion people holding the same intention for 6 hours or 8 hours in a heightened state, I cannot imagine how that would influence life. I mean, I've seen crazy synchronicities and manifestations happen in my life after a powerful shroom trip. So if you have 1 billion people manifesting that on such a scale, wow.
Maybe that's what the plant medicines are leading us to, right? Maybe one at a time, they're like picking people off. You'll meet someone and they'll be like, hey, you know what? The plant told me like to be part of this 1 billion humans thing. And before you know it, it's a thing.
They definitely have their own agenda, but I feel like it's a very benevolent agenda.
Well, I've heard with ayahuasca, I listened to a podcast with someone who had done ayahuasca, and they said on that podcast, and I don't know whether you agree or disagree with this, they basically said that when they had this ayahuasca experience, that Mother Ayahuasca said to them basically like, people shouldn't be doing this so like negligently. People shouldn't kind of all be jumping on the bandwagon and doing it like this is a sacred experience, and people are kind of misusing it, and that that there's not enough of this world or whatever to give to everyone, and that people need to do it like properly and with intention. And when the ayahuasca comes to you as well, like they should be drawn to it rather than just going and ticking it off their travel bucket list, right?
I 100% agree. And that's why for the 1 billion humans mission, I'm primarily focused on mushrooms because I feel like they're the safest, friendliest substances in the plant medicine world. And you can also do a very low dose of them. So you don't have to go crazy. Whereas with ayahuasca, I do think that you should only do it if you're called. It's a very intense experience. I personally have benefited from it a lot. But I would never prescribe it to 1 billion people without proper preparation and integration.
How do you know if you're called? I'm trying to figure this out at the moment. Like if I've been called. Is the fact that I'm asking you if I've been called, does that indicate that I have not been called?
No, I think if you're curious about it and you feel like you could benefit from it and you're ready to experience it, then
that's enough.
Then you're ready. But let's say the person who's not called is like if you phone your mom up and you're like, Mom, you have to go do ayahuasca now. And she's like, what are you talking about? Well, she's not called to it, clearly.
Yes.
But if you're curious and you're like, I know there's something in this for me. And let's say you've been feeling it for years. Like for me, I've been feeling the ayahuasca call, kind of low level call for years. And it was just such an obvious thing for me to, I'm so glad I did shrooms though first. I'm so glad that I prepared myself with the acid experiences and the shrooms and the DMT, because I feel like if I had just done ayahuasca as my first ever experience, I would have panicked a little bit.
Right. Okay. All right. That's the advice I needed then. Cause yeah, I haven't, I haven't tried like psilocybin basically. Like the shrooms that I did they were pretty mild. So maybe I need to kind of like take that next step up before kind of going full ayahuasca basically. Yeah. I'll message you about that, man. I'm going to get your advice on this. You can, you can be my, what do you call them? Like the plant, the people who, it's like the
trip
plant
sitter?
pharmacologist people. What are they called?
I don't know what they're called.
Yeah.
The plant shaman, the shroom wizard.
Yeah, you can be my mushroom wizard. All right, dude. Yeah, I wanted to ask you just before, while we're still on recording, just, it might be interesting for people anyway. How's life out in Bali? Like we haven't, obviously like we met in Mexico and stuff. It was super cool meeting you in Playa del Carmen, but like haven't kind of kept up too much with, aside from obviously the podcast and stuff, like with what life's like over there. So like, how's life in Bali? You staying there long term? Like what's going on?
Bali's amazing. Bali's home for me now. I really feel connected to this land. It's an amazing place to grow because the people that come to Bali, if they're not tourists, like just expats who want to live here, they all come with the intention of working on themselves, whether it's working on their business, working on their spirit, working on their mind. And so the quality of the people here is incredible. Like every time I go out and meet new people, they inspire me constantly. So I feel like for me, it's been an amazing place to grow and to build the podcast and to step into the greater version of myself. And I mean, the ocean is beautiful. The weather is wonderful. Great food. A lot of convenience. Like they have this thing called Gojek, where it's like kind of like Uber Eats, but it's next level. It's next level. So you can order anything through your phone, and everyone drives a little scooter, which I find to be so much more efficient than a car and so fun.
It's great.
Yeah.
You got a scooter?
I got a scooter, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, when I first came to Bali, I just used the Gojek scooters. So I was too scared to go on one on my own. And then 3 months later, I'm like, okay, it's time. It's time I learn this.
Oh,
and then I never looked up.
It's part of the life out there. This is one of the great things about Asia. I mean, it's a shame here in Mexico because here there's just not really like a motorbike scooter culture. But all over Asia, it's like a scooter and motorbike culture. Like most of the things on the road is them, and you have cars as well. But like it's so easy, you just nip around everywhere. You can just park it wherever you want. It's great. Yeah,
I'm gonna start the 1 billion scooters mission to replace all cars with scooters.
There you go. Yeah, you see, I in this conversation, I've been the mother ayahuasca for you, like just planting that seed the whole way, just waiting for you to take that.
Love it.
Are you in Canggu?
I'm in Canggu, yeah.
Canggu, cool, yeah. Great.
Have
place,
you been?
Great place. Yeah, I've been to Canggu. I've been actually twice to Canggu. I've been once to Ubud as well. But yeah, I love it. Like Bali's awesome. I mean, Asia's just amazing in general, but like, yeah, Bali's pretty special too.
What about you, man? How's your environment, and how do you feel about where you are now? And are you going to stay there for a long time, or?
For now, I think Mexico feels like home to me, right? Like I've got my residency now. I'm actually extending it literally like next week, and going to have like a 3 or 4 year, I think it'll be residency. So like, I'm pretty much, once you've got that, you don't really have to worry about it for a while. You just feel like you just live here. And it's awesome. Like I still really like Mexico. I mean, for me, the big draw of Mexico was really just that there's a lot of like freedom seekers who come here, and Mexico really stood itself apart from a lot of other places in the world. It wasn't the only place, but it was one of the prime places that was like, we're just not going to do this tyranny thing. I mean, Mexico just seems to have I don't know why, but it just seems to have some kind of a defense against that. So, it's massive, it's huge. I love the climate and stuff like that. But, for me, I would say like Asia still has a special magic to it, in my view, more so than Mexico. Mexico is great in like lots of other ways. But I still think that there's something about Asia that is like particularly special. So I do want to go back there, but I'm not sure whether I'd want to necessarily live in Asia long term. One of the things I like about Mexico is it's a bit less of a kind of cultural jump. People like the language is like learnable. I'm learning it now, and it's not kind of, trying to learn Thai or trying to learn, Vietnamese would be much more of a hurdle. And I think that you can assimilate a bit easier as a foreigner here as well. I think that it's generally in Asia, people tend to live in the expat communities, and that's where you'll stay. You're not going to necessarily go and live like amongst the locals. You'd kind of be a bit of a sore thumb, I think, in Asia. So it has that. And in those respects, Mexico is better. So it's difficult to compare the two, like I know that I'm comparing them right now, but I would say right now, Mexico feels right. It's a really awesome place. I love it. I'm having a good life here. And I feel like I've had a lot of synchronicity kind of come about in my life since coming here. So I definitely think that I made the right choice coming. Whether I'll be here forever, I don't know. But, it'd be nice at some point in my life. I would like to come back to Asia. Like I really want to bring my girlfriend as well to Asia, and I want her to experience Asia, and maybe if we go back to Asia at some point, we'll be like, this is the life out here. But for now, Mexico's where I feel at home.
And first you got to do ayahuasca, and then you can come to Asia.
So you can't do it in Asia? It's not much of a thing out there?
I think you can. There are some people who do it underground here. But for me, I just feel like that land where you are now, I think it's the perfect environment.
It's the place. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I gotta think more about this. But first, it's gonna be mushrooms. So we'll see how that goes. Oh, dude, this has been awesome. Yeah, we almost did do 2 hours in the end. I did say I think this was going to be my longest episode before we started speaking, and I'm pretty sure it has been. So, yeah, thanks for giving me so much of your time, and it's been awesome, like catching up and stuff as well.
Yeah, Johnny, thank you so much for having me on, for letting me talk about my mission, and for letting me talk about psychedelics for 2 hours. I mean, there's nothing more than
that. I mean. What's better than that? So yeah, I guess just the final thing before we sign things off, just if you want to just let my audience know like where they can find you, all of your channels, where they can find the podcast, the mission, all the rest of it, and also just any kind of like final parting thoughts that you got as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people can find me on jamesxander.com. You'll see all the links to the podcast there, and the 1 billion humans mission is at 1billionhumans.com. So anyone who feels resonance with that mission, I would absolutely love it if you could join us. It's just a simple email link. There's nothing, no spam. And then we'll announce when the next trip is going to be. And final parting thoughts. Step into your courage, I would say, for anyone listening who feels a little bit scared to do something, but they know they want to do it. Whether it's a YouTube channel or to do something creative or to ask someone out on a date, anything that you feel scared to do, but you know it's going to serve you, lean into it, pluck up the courage, and watch your life transform.
Thanks, James. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Johnny.